Hi friends, welcome to another story time with the Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum. I'm Miss Lindsay and today we are continuing with Minnie the Mule and the Erie Canal. Chapter 9, Mike and Sarah Clash. Sarah, first thing tomorrow I want you to get Mike's laundry for me from his room. I am going to try and wash one more time before we leave the canal. We start running in salt water as we go east, and I won't use it for washing clothes unless I have to. Her mother stirred the pot for chicken soup she had made that day when she was not helping Captain John at the wheel. I am too tired to even think about doing laundry tonight. Remembering what her mother said the next morning, Sarah went directly to Mike's room after doing her chores in the bow stable. She knocked at the door. When Mike didn't answer, she timidly went in. He must be helping Pa. She wrinkled her nose at the way his room smelled, of sweat and dirty clothes. His bed was unmade, and his discarded clothes were laying in heaps on the floor and the foot of his bunk. "What do you think you are doing?" Mike's voice boomed behind her. She had squatted beside his bunk to pick up some of his dirty socks, and she jumped at the sound of his voice. Looking up at him, she could see that he was furious. She felt herself start to tremble, but she faced him bravely. "Mama asked me to get your laundry so she could do it before we get to where the mules leave." She was disgusted with herself for being afraid of him. "I won't let him know he scares me." "If you want clean clothes, someone has to pick them up since you don't." "You stay out of my room. If I want you here, I will tell you." He looked down at her with a scowl. Realizing he had better not be too mean to the boss's daughter, he added gruffly, "I will get my things together and put them in the laundry pail. But you stay out of here." He shoved a bulky canvas bag that was sticking out from under his bunk back against the wall with his foot. She was still shaking when she went up to tell her mother that Mike would bring his laundry himself. "What is wrong? Did something upset you?" Her mother looked at her pale face with concern. No." Mike's angry face flashed before her, and Sarah decided she had better not tell Mama just how much he scared her. Her father needed him, and she knew he would fire him if he was told Mike frightened her. Why was he so mad anyhow? All I did was go in his room to get his dirty old clothes. You would think he had something I wanted to steal. She shrugged her shoulders. I guess I will just stay out of his way from now on. They docked early that night so they could reach Waterfleet during the daylight hours. Sarah knew that her father had contacted Neil Anderson, the farmer who would keep the mules in his pasture while they went on to New York City. He was going to meet them about noon at Waterfleet's dock, just outside the lock. Sarah wrapped her arms around Minnie's neck as she held her reins at the bottom of the ramp in the bow stable. "You be a good girl while we are gone, Minnie. Eat lots of good grass and rest. We will be back in 10 days. Minnie whinnied, snuffling softly as she nudged Sarah's blonde braids, and Sarah knew that she understood her. How can Mike be so mean to her? "Come on, Squirt. We are waiting for you." She looked up at the top of the steep board, and she could see Pa standing there ready to guide Minnie down the ramp to the towpath. "We are coming." Sarah, sure-footed as always, led Minnie up the incline to where her father stood. "The other mules are all unloaded?" "Yes, they are. Mr. Anderson is here just like he promised." Her father led Minnie to the boarding ramp and held on to her tail as she started down. Sarah reached the towpath and saw that Jack stood between the two other mules, holding their reins as he talked to a tall boy with fair hair. Her Uncle Dan was leading Maud up the ramp into Mr. Anderson's flatbed wagon, and Mike was behind him with Molly. "Are they all going to ride in the wagon?" Sarah watched them tie the first two to the high rail near the driver's seat. Yes, it's easier than leading them along, the tall boy answered her. He looked about the same age as her cousin, and he had bright blue eyes. He smiled at her, and she saw that he had two deep dimples, one in each cheek. For some reason that she didn't understand, she felt her cheeks get hot. She could feel herself blushing. To cover her confusion, she turned to Jack. Are we going to see where they will be pastured? Her cousin grinned, enjoying the sight of her red cheeks. Gosh, I think Sarah has discovered boys. No, we saw the pastures before. We will just pick up the mules when we come back. This is Mr. Anderson's son, Teddy. We met last year. He turned to Teddy and added mischievously, This is my little cousin Sarah's first year on the canal. She is a year younger than me. Teddy smiled as he looked up at him. Are you having a good time? Do you like being a canaler? He was looking her over with interest, and she was suddenly glad she was wearing her blue dress that Mama said made her eyes look bluer. I love it. Have you ever made the trip up the canal? No, but I have taken a packet boat into New York to the harbor. I would like to try riding on a barge someday. Sarah, tell your pa that I have lunch ready and ask Mr. Anderson and his son to join us. Mama was leaning over the rail behind them. I heard you, Abby. Pa took the reins of the last mule to be loaded. Sarah felt a little spurt of pleasure realizing that Teddy was going to stay and visit them for a little while longer. From the wide grin on his face, she thought he liked the idea too. A few minutes later, Jack ran back to his family's barge to tell his mother lunch was ready, and Teddy followed Sarah up the ramp to the Fairchild One. Pa and Mr. Anderson were just behind them. As they stepped down onto the deck, Mike came out of the bow stable with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. We should be back in 10 days. Meet us here about midday. Can Dan and I count on you being here? Pa stopped to speak to him. I will be here. Most of my gear is still below. I'll take my wages now. Mike held out a dirty palm for the money that the captain handed him. As soon as he stuffed it in his pocket, he turned and went quickly to the towpath, not bothering to say goodbye to anyone. Surly cuss, isn't he? Neil Anderson remarked as he watched Mike go up the road. I have had hoggies that were easier to deal with, Captain Fairweather smiled ruefully. He just happened to be the first one to apply for the job this year. As we were ready to leave, I won't take him on for the next trip. He grinned. I think we are all going to enjoy the next 10 days without him. Let's go and have some lunch. Chapter 10, Leaving the Erie Canal. Abigail had prepared a big midday meal, and they forgot about Mike as Teddy and his father told them the latest news of Waterfleet and Troy. The city of Troy was across the river from them, and Mama said she had bought Pa some dress shirts made there. I like them because their collars are separate, and it makes them easier to launder and iron. Troy is known as the Collar City, you know, Mr. Anderson smiled and took a big bite of his chicken sandwich. Why do they call it that? Sarah asked. Let me tell Pa. Teddy was eager to impress Sarah. We learned about it in school. There was this Mrs. Hannah Orlando Montague who made the first shirts with detached collars for her husband way back in 1819. So many people asked her to make some for them that they started to manufacture them, and they kept getting more and more popular. I have two myself for Sunday wear. He grinned at her, and his dimples deepened. So that is why Troy got to be called the Collar City. That is amazing. Sarah gazed at him in open admiration. Her father chuckled. Neil tells me that Teddy has never been on a barge. Why don't you and Jack give him a tour of ours before we leave? The three of them left quickly. They took Teddy down to the bow stable to show him where the mules stayed when they were not walking the towpath. He wrinkled his nose and laughed. "It smells just like the stable back at our farm. While we are being towed downriver, we will give it a good cleaning and some fresh hay." Sarah looked around her and realized that she and Jack had a big job ahead of them. Pa had told her that he would give them money to spend in New York City if they did a good job. "Yeah, of course it will smell just the same a day or two after the mules come back," Jack laughed. "What is in there?" Teddy pointed to the door of Mike's room. "That is where Mike sleeps. We are not supposed to go in there." Sarah frowned, remembering how mad he had been at her. "He has made sure of that." Jack laughed again as he pointed at the big padlock on the outside of the door. "He must have put that on after he came back from Schenectady." Before long, Mr. Anderson said it was time for him and Teddy to leave. They would have to travel slowly with the load of mules. He promised to meet them again in 10 days to return the team to them. Sarah watched them leave from the deck, and Teddy turned to wave as he and his father started down the road. "Sarah's got a boyfriend," Jack teased her. "I have not." She could feel her cheeks get hot again. "But he is nice, and he doesn't tease me like you do." She stuck her tongue out at him. "We are about ready to tie into the tow. I thought we might have time to see a little of Waterfleet, but maybe we can on the way back." Pa pulled the landing plank in. "You two would enjoy seeing the arsenal here. It is the oldest one in the whole country. It was built in 1813, and a lot of weapons are made here." A small tug attached itself to their barges and pulled them to the point where a line of barges were waiting to make the 2-day trip into New York City's harbor. It was almost 3 that afternoon when the line at last was complete, and 9 barges began the trip behind the steam-powered tug that would take them on their journey. "Let's all take the rest of the day off and enjoy the sights." Captain Fairweather settled into his seat in the stern, with his pipe sending a wreath of smoke around his head. Sarah and Jack and her mother joined him to watch the receding shores of Waterfleet. Looking across the wide expanse of water, they could see the skyline of Troy. Sarah drew a deep sigh of pleasure. This has been the best day yet. Mike is gone for 10 days. The mules don't have to be walked. And I met Teddy Anderson. That is it for today's story time. Thank you for joining us. We hope you join us again tomorrow. See you soon.